Hello, everybody. My name's Tim Hansen. I serve with a bunch of really good people on our South Central Synod of Wisconsin Immigration and Refugee Task Force. I am a pastor out in Sun Prairie and really happy to be with you this evening. Just wanted to give you a little history. Before I do that, I need to tell you that we're recording this tonight. So if you know people that want to get a chance to watch this tomorrow, I think it'll be up. Robin thought maybe tomorrow. So if going forward, if anybody is interested, they can watch it on the Synod website. So hope that works. Also, I think we're going to keep everybody muted. Except for when it's Q&A time to talk, and I'll have Kyle help you with that. But just a little background on our task force. We have been together for a long time, mostly in our recent history dealing with refugee resettlement. We spent a good part of 10, 12 years working on helping to resettle mostly Bhutanese refugees from Nepal, but also Iraqis and a few other assorted refugees that came over. We worked as a partner with Lutheran Social Service of Wisconsin, and up until the last administration had a pretty good run with helping build the communities here in Madison. But with the reduction in the numbers for immigration, and then finally with LSS needing to kind of pull out of Madison, we have been sort of wondering what does God have in store for us? What are the opportunities that are there for us? And so it wasn't hard to discover another look at immigration and how we could be to walk with people, to learn more about immigration issues in our country and in our synod, to look at how we can work with organizations like Amparo and others within the ELCA in terms of how do we help educate people and then advocate for people and help others. So it's been kind of a little bit of change in direction for our group, but if anybody's interested, you can certainly check with the Synod, and we'd welcome anybody that wants to be involved to join with us as we do this walk together. So before we get going, I'm going to introduce Kyle, but I'd like to have a prayer. So I invite you all to pray with me. Gracious God, you have promised to be with your creation forever. You have blessed your creation with a great diversity of people. Motivate us as your children to be a welcoming presence to any and all who are hurting in any way. Especially today, we pray for unaccompanied children and families seeking asylum in our country. Protect them and give them hope. Use us to be your voice of hope and hands of peace. Give us courage to use our faith as a wellspring of tenacity to seek good for those asylum seekers. Be with all those in power that they may also seek to do good to these, your children in our midst. Grant us mercy and vision to be your hands and feet. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So I'd like to introduce Kyle Minden, who works with Lutheran Office for Public Policy, and invite Kyle to take us to the next part of this meeting. But again, a hearty welcome from our task force to you all. Thanks for coming.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Tim, and for all of you for spending your evening with us today. My name is Kyle Minden from the Lutheran Office for Public Policy in Wisconsin, one of our co-hosts today. LPPW is a statewide advocacy affiliate of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, where we advocate for policies that support peace, justice, and care for all of God's creation here in Wisconsin. We are so happy that you're joining us for this important discussion today. Before we get started, I wanted to discuss a quick outline, as well as mention ways that you can participate throughout this panel or throughout this discussion. First and foremost, we ask that everyone stay muted for the entirety of our panel discussion today. to cut out any background noise and ensure that we could hear our presenter. We're about to hear from our guest speaker tonight, and afterwards she's gracious enough to spend some time taking questions. If you wouldn't mind putting those into the chat, and so we can get all of those questions and try to get to as many answered as we can. Throughout the presentations, feel free to put things in the chat. And finally, I just want to let everyone know that we are recording this session again, just to reiterate that. We can find it on our Facebook page tomorrow. So with that, I'll pass it off to Christy Jones from the South Central Synod Task Force for introductions. Christy.
Thanks, Kyle. I'm going to keep this very short because I want to make sure that our speaker has the full amount of time to share her information. So Erin Barbato is our speaker tonight. Erin is faculty at UW Law School, where she directs the Immigrant Justice Clinic. Erin has taken her law students to volunteer at a detention center in Texas, where they provided pro bono legal services to migrants, and she herself has volunteered in Tijuana. I've heard Erin speak before, and her stories are always incredibly powerful. So with that very short introduction, I'm going to turn it over to her. Welcome, Erin.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for this invitation. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for welcoming me into this space to talk for a little bit. I often have a lot to say. I don't have a ton of time tonight, so this isn't the end of any information you can always feel free to reach out to me. My email and everything like that, I'll share at the end. But feel free to ask questions during the presentation if that is helpful. I'm not sure I'll be able to see the chat, but we'll figure it out. But hopefully there'll be time at the end for some questions. And I just want to take the time to recognize that a lot of what I do and a lot of what I will speak about is really speaking about other people and their journeys and their strength and their power. So this isn't really the work of me. I'm motivated by the strength and the compassion and the lives of others that I really hope that we can celebrate and recognize tonight, and also talk about how we can continue to support the people that I work with and to make this world a little bit safer place for everyone. So I'm going to share my screen now. Hopefully it works. There's always some technical difficulties at times, but hopefully you all can see this. Let me just, I'm going to play from the start. So as everybody can see this, I get a thumbs up if that's good. All right, thank you. All right. So what I'm going to talk about tonight, mostly from what Christy had asked me to speak about, is the work that we do at the Immigrant Justice Clinic, including our experiential learning trips to a place in Texas and also a place in Tijuana. And then just a very brief overview of some current events that are going on in immigration. Not enough time by any means to talk about all of them, but maybe just touch base, and then we might have some time for some questions. So I am the director of the Immigrant Justice Clinic at the University of Wisconsin Law School, and we are a clinical program housed within the Economic Justice Institute. So it's a nonprofit, but we are, I am an associate clinical professor as well as the director of this nonprofit. At the Immigrant Justice Clinic provides legal services to Wisconsin's underserved immigrant community and representation to people facing deportation, often seeking asylum, or people seeking other forms of humanitarian relief in the United States. The work is done mostly by my students, and they practice as attorneys under my law license. So while they're in their second or third year of law school, they get to appear in court and represent people that otherwise would not have representation and otherwise would be standing alone in immigration court. The Immigrant Justice Clinic is based on the Wisconsin idea. So the Wisconsin idea, for those of you who are familiar with the University of Wisconsin, it's one of the longest and deepest traditions surrounding the University of Wisconsin. The Wisconsin idea signifies a general principle that education should influence people's lives beyond the boundaries of the classroom. Synonymous with Wisconsin for more than a century, this idea has become a guiding philosophy of university outreach efforts in Wisconsin and throughout the world. So I believe that the Immigrant Justice Clinic really embodies this Wisconsin idea in what we do within the borders of Wisconsin and what we do to support people around the world. The reason that the Immigrant Justice Clinic was created is because in removal proceedings, or what most people commonly know as deportation proceedings, someone who is facing deportation can have an attorney, but only if they can afford an attorney or find a pro bono attorney. So when we look at Wisconsin in particular, even across the nation, there are just not enough attorneys for people who are facing removal. In criminal proceedings, our government will provide you an attorney. You will have a government paid by the attorney, but that's different in immigration proceedings. So even though you may be deported, you may be separated from the only country that you may have ever known, or you may be risking deportation to a country where you fear persecution. You do not receive an attorney from our government. You are forced to defend yourself alone. So this is what we're trying to cure. We want to make sure that no one is ever standing alone in front of an immigration judge, that they have access to justice and a fair trial. It's a big ask, and we have a lot of work to do in Wisconsin right now, including me. We only have 3 attorneys that do this work on a pro bono basis. Deportation cases are the only legal proceedings in the United States in which people are routinely detained by the federal government and are required to litigate for the liberty against trained government attorneys without the assistance of counsel. So with the help of my students, we are able to represent people who otherwise wouldn't be represented. That being said, there's so much more work to be done. There's not enough of us to represent people, but hopefully in the future, we're moving towards something called universal representation, which would have the government, either local or federal, fund attorneys to do this work. And in Dane County, thankfully, we do have this. We have 3 attorneys or 2.5 attorneys at the Community Immigration Law Center, graduates of the Immigrant Justice Clinic, that now provide representation to people that are detained in Wisconsin. I'll talk about that in a minute. Right here, actually. So we have immigrant detention in Wisconsin, okay? 1 detention center currently, and it's in Dodge County. There are up to 200 beds there for people who are in deportation proceedings. These are not for people that are serving a criminal sentence. Some of them have served a criminal sentence before and then transferred to immigrant detention, or some people are there because they've had interactions with ICE, or in the past, prior to the Trump administration, or to the middle of the Trump administration, we also represented people who were seeking asylum that were detained at Dodge County Correctional Facility, but that's no longer happening at that facility, and I'll explain that a little bit later. We do a lot of representation of children in asylum, special immigrant juvenile status. That means a child that is abused, abandoned, or neglected by one or both of their parents may be eligible to get their green card here in the United States if a judge finds that it's not in their best interest to return to their home country. We represent people applying for U non-immigrant status, as for survivors of serious crimes that help in the investigation and or the prosecution of that crime. T non-immigrant status, which is for survivors of international human trafficking. And also, since the Trump administration, we represent families that were separated during the zero tolerance policy, and some children that were permanently separated from their parents. 2 things that we have started to do over the past about 5 years are experiential learning trips. It's a way to use students and their vacation time to serve people that need legal representation. And so we do one in South Texas, the South Texas Family Residential Center located in Dilley, Texas, as well as over the past 2 years, we started working in Tijuana to serve people who are seeking asylum in that city. One thing to touch on before I talk about the experiential learning trip to the Family Detention Center is detention. So the United States has the largest immigrant detention system in the world. In 2019, there was an average of 50,000 people detained in immigrant detention facilities in the United States. That's the size of a small city of Annapolis, Maryland. It's really incredible when we think about it. The number of people in detention has decreased substantially today due to the pandemic and also due to the Biden administration. However, in my opinion, no one should be in detention who is facing deportation for immigration-related issues. It's inhumane, in my opinion. And one thing that makes it incredibly inhumane is that many of these facilities are run by private corporations, billion-dollar corporations. Core Civic and Geo Group are two of those. They benefit by the number of beds that they fill with people who are non-citizens and make billions of dollars, which has so many levels of inhumanity to that. So the South Texas Family Residential Center is located in Dilley, Texas. It's about an hour from San Antonio, Texas, and about an hour from our southern border with Mexico. It is operated by Core Civic, this private detention center, and it's been in operation since 2014. There aren't many pictures that I can show you because when we volunteer there, we're not allowed to bring our phones to the facility. We're not even allowed to take pictures of driving into the driveway of the facility. Otherwise, our phones will be confiscated and we will not be allowed to volunteer. So we take that very seriously and didn't break the rules, but there are some images online. So this facility holds up to 2,400 women and children. Conditions for children in detention. The things that are happening in Dilley, Texas, as well as the two other family residential facilities are supposed to be compliant with what's called the Flores Settlement, which is to protect children who are in immigrant detention. Children should be placed in the least restrictive settings. The children must be released from detention within 20 days. The government must implement standards of care and treatment of children. That just isn't being done. Right now, the facility at Dilley, Texas, due to the pandemic and the Biden administration, only has about 300 people who are there, women and children, but still too many, in my opinion. Dilley, Texas is really far away from most things, and it's really hard to see and have any oversight of the facility because of its location. So what do we do when we're there? We help women and children who are fleeing their home countries and hoping to apply for asylum and protection to seek refuge in the United States under our laws. So the UN Refugee Convention of 1951, as well as the US Refugee Act of 1980, which allows people to apply for asylum either within the United States or at a port of entry. And even if they're in the United States and they entered without inspection, without being processed through a port of entry, under our laws, people are permitted to apply for asylum. That is the law. It's open to anyone from any country, but it allows people to seek asylum who have a fear of return to their home country based on past persecution or fear of future persecution based on race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion. Our asylum process has been eviscerated over the past 4 years, and the Biden administration is attempting to rebuild it, but it is a very difficult task. I was happy to hear that you guys are so involved in the refugee community. Most of the talks I give, many people don't understand the difference between refugee and asylee. So you guys really do. And my wonderful pictures of my stick people are not going to be very helpful to all of you because you are beyond this. But just to summarize, we work with people seeking asylum. So people that are arriving at either knocking on our door at a port of entry or who are in the United States and seeking refuge. Refugees are processed by the United Nations first, and then determined to be refugees, and then the United Nations looks for countries to accept them. As you kind of talked about in the introduction, refugees haven't been arriving. Our borders truly have been closed to refugees for the past 4 years. You can see the numbers, and the refugee number is decided by the executive, by the president. And so we saw high 85,000 in around 85,000 in Obama's last year of presidency, and then down to closer to 11,000 the last year of the Trump presidency. Biden administration is now opening it up to 125,000 in the fiscal year of 2021, and initial processing is hopefully going to be started soon. But what we do is these women, the women and children are fleeing their home countries, are seeking asylum in the United States because the UN does not have a place for them to go in their home countries. Most of them are from the Northern Triangle of Central America. So El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Guatemala. These are just a few other pictures of the detention facilities. We work in trailers when we're there. These trailers, they are air conditioning and but they are temporary, but this is where people live. And it's in a very desolate area, hard to be seen, hard to be reached. And then the Days Inn is where we stay. So I just included a picture of that, which is only about 5 minutes from the detention facility. But what we do when we're there is we meet with women and children to prepare them for what's called their credible fear interviews. In order to enter the United States or to even be placed into an immigrant detention center in the United States, you generally have to pass your credible fear interview. And what does that mean? It's kind of the first step to applying for asylum. If you can demonstrate to an asylum officer a significant possibility that you can establish in an immigration hearing before an immigration judge that you have been persecuted or have a well-founded fear of persecution on account of your race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion if returned to your home country. So that is what we do when we're at this facility. We meet with women and children to talk about their fear and how we practice with them. How do you answer a question from a very scary asylum officer? What is important of your story? What do you fear? We help them prepare so that they have the best chance of articulating their qualifications for applying for asylum. It's truly, it's a difficult process for them. What they've endured, the number of women that we've met with there, I don't even know how many, but all of their stories touched me in a different way, but also have always instilled in me the need for, their need for protection. The last time that we went down to Dili was end of the summer of 2019. And this was right after the Trump administration initiated what's called the Safe Third Country Transit Ban. And basically what this does was, this wasn't law, this is just policy. So that asylum laws that are codified in the Immigration and Nationality Act and the Refugee Act of 1980, those are the laws. But Trump came in and initiated this policy called the Safe Third Country Transit Ban that said that anybody seeking asylum at our southern border was barred from receiving asylum if they passed through a third country on their way to their southern border without applying for asylum in that third country. It's nonsensical. It's absurd. The goal of the policy was to stop people from being eligible for asylum. They were successful in that. They succeeded. Anyone who arrived at the southern border who wasn't from Mexico was barred from getting asylum. So the first day that we walked into the Dili facility that year, a woman walked up to me and said, "Abogada, no hay asilo." Like, attorney, you attorney-looking person, there isn't asylum anymore. And the truth was that was true for them. And that week we spent appealing their cases and attempting to get them out of detention in order to seek asylum in front of an immigration judge. But it was truly horrific for the women and children that were there. Thankfully, this Safe Third Country Transit Ban is no longer in effect. So the next trip that I want to tell you a little bit about is the work we started doing in Mexico on the other side of the border with an organization called Al Otro Lado, the other side. We noticed in about December of 2019 that asylum seekers were no longer being brought from the southern border of the United States to be detained at Dodge County Correctional Facility. That sounds nonsensical in a lot of ways too, but why would our government place people from the southern border all the way up in the middle of Wisconsin when people generally often don't know where they are? But we noticed that they stopped being transferred up there. And then we learned why. Because of two policies. One is called metering, and one is called the Migrant Protection Protocols. So these policies, the Safe Third Country Transit Ban, the Migrant Protection Protocol, and something called metering, really built a policy wall on our southern border, even though we didn't have a full border wall built. So these are just a few pictures from our time in Tijuana, where we met with families from really all over the world, many from the Northern Triangle, but many from countries in Africa, even the Middle East and China. When the first policy was called metering. So when someone normally would, prior to the Trump administration, would seek asylum at our southern border, they would go up to Customs Border Protection officer and tell them that they wanted to apply for asylum. Once this metering policy went into effect, people would have to get on La Lista. They would go to the port of entry. This is called El Chaparral in Tijuana, where a Mexican government official or an asylum seeker that they had hired would hand out these numbers on these little Post-it notes. And you would have to wait in your city until your number was called in order to process for asylum, regardless of your fear that you had in Mexico, regardless of your age. So children were being turned around at the border. People at first were waiting 2 or 3 weeks, but towards after this was going on for about a year and a half, it went up to 6 months to a year. This is a line in the morning, one morning, of people waiting when they first arrived in Tijuana to get their number. Once their number was called, when we were volunteering there, we would meet with the people who were about to present themselves at the border to CBP and to be taken into detention into the United States. We would provide them with warm clothing because they were only allowed to wear 1 layer of clothing when they are in there, and sacks, because the hilera, or ice box where they were held, is so cold. It truly is very cold. We would tell them about detention, when they would have their credible fear interview. And one thing that I will never forget is when you would meet with a parent who was traveling with a child. We would write the parent's name and date of birth in permanent marker on each of the children's arms, because of the family separation that our country was doing, and that we had no way of reuniting families if they were separated. So that was the only solution we had, was to hope that our government would be able to reunite a child and a parent if they were separated, because the name and the date of birth of a parent would be written on their arm. Then we also saw migrant protection protocols, or other people call it remain in Mexico. So we worked with people who, after they presented themselves to Customs Border Protection, they would enter the United States and then be sent back to Mexico to wait for their chance to apply for asylum in front of an immigration judge in the United States, which would be 6 months to a year. These are just the pictures of a tent camp that was in Matamoros, Mexico, where migrants were forced to live while they were seeking asylum. Really difficult living situations for people, and there was very little humanitarian relief provided to people in these cities, and so much danger caused to the people seeking refuge because of their vulnerabilities in that area, and we offered little protection. In Tijuana, there were a number of shelters, but not enough to house all of the people that needed the protection. If anybody's interested in learning a little bit more about this, this is an incredible podcast about migrant protection protocols. But that being said, thankfully, migrant protection protocols, it ended, and people on that list are now being processed into the United States in a systematic way. Not everybody on the same day. There are about 20,000 people, but about 100 and 200 people are being processed so that they can reunite with family in the United States or live with friends in the United States while they process for asylum. It's a really difficult process, and their journey obviously isn't over. So most of the work that we did with Al Otro Lado was, we give general information, like this is the asylum process, this is the detention process, this is where you're going to sleep, you need to wear warm clothes. information about asylum. We would make food. We would care for children. They had medical facilities there to help people who had, a lot of women maybe were pregnant. We also worked with a lot of people that were transgender and needed some medical attention, and then provided the information at the port of entry. Okay, and then real quick before we get to questions, I just wanted to summarize what President Biden has talked about quite a bit, which is the Citizenship Act of 2021. This is a large, aggressive, comprehensive reform that most likely would be broken up into pieces, but I just want to highlight some of the things that would be kind of game changers for the immigration system in the United States. It would offer a pathway to citizenship for undocumented workers. So about 11 million people would have a pathway to citizenship. It would be about an 8-year pathway, which makes me a little nervous because we all know we don't have 8 years of one president. Oh, well, I mean, we could, but there's an election in the middle of it. So, but it would be a way for many people to process. And when I hear all the time, why don't people just get in line? These 11 million people don't really have a line to get into in our immigration laws. Our immigration laws are extremely strict and restrictive. It also has an expedited pathway to citizenship for people with DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, people with Temporary Protective Status, TPS, as well as farm workers. So that would be about a 3-year pathway to citizenship for that group of people. There would be an increase in employment-based visas and green cards. It would focus on family reunification. So oftentimes when someone is processing through family, they may be waiting in that one of those lines for 20 years. It would allow family reunification prior to that 20 years. More worker protection and employment verification, focus on the on rebuilding our asylum laws and really protecting vulnerable populations around the world. There would be smart border screening and enhanced enforcement against criminal organizations, supporting vulnerable individuals and improving immigration courts. Right now, our immigration courts are in destruction. There are 1.3 million cases that are pending in front of immigration court. That means that people are waiting years to seek the relief that they are afforded under our laws. And then will be some efforts into addressing root causes of migration. And that would be focused on a number of places, but very much on the Northern Triangle of Central America. And then I wanted to talk quickly just about what we're hearing in the news right now about our southern border. Right now, our southern border is closed. It's closed. There's nothing very complicated about. I mean, it's incredibly complicated, but it's closed. And there's a lot of fake news out there about what's going on, but Title 14 expulsions and restrictions based on COVID-19 continue, meaning that if anybody arrives at our southern border, even to seek asylum, they're going to be turned away because of this Title 42 expulsion. There is two caveats to that. One is the people that are processing through the migrant protection protocols. And then secondly, unaccompanied minors. What's an unaccompanied minor? An unaccompanied minor is a child under the age of 18 who is traveling by themselves to the United States. Not by themselves, but without a biological parent or adoptive parent. So Alejandro Mayorkas, he decided to, that while our border is closed, that he will not turn away unaccompanied children because of their vulnerabilities and the danger that they face. So under the authority of Title 42, almost all people, including people fleeing persecution, are being expelled from the United States. But the Secretary of Homeland Security, Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas, said yesterday that the border is closed. But he says, we're expelling families, we are expelling single adults, and we've made a decision that we will not expel young, vulnerable children. When I was in Tijuana, it was one of the most horrific parts of it were these children that had fled from Central America and were then all alone, often not by choice, but by circumstance. So their parents may have been killed, or their parents may have been abusive, or their parents may have been members of the group that was persecuting them. They had very little protection in where they go. So I'm happy that he's recognizing this, but as you can see here, these are the facilities that many of these children are living in right now. And we're trying to process them so that they can reunite with family or be in a safe place that's not a detention facility. So that was my really bright and happy presentation, but I hope that it provided you some information that was helpful. But I also hope that you may have questions for me that I can answer and maybe provide some information that will be helpful.
Sure. Good. Thank you. Thank you, Erin, so much for that presentation. And I think I'm going to defer to you on whether you'd rather me read questions from the chat or whether you'd like to have people raise their hand and unmute for questions.
If you have some in the chat, maybe we can start with those, and then we can have people raise their hands if they like to, or just ask questions.
We did have some questions. Everyone is welcome. Please put your questions in the chat moving forward. We did have a couple questions from people beforehand. So the first question is, in your experience, what is a common misconception or prominent piece of misinformation about immigration policy or how the system works, either at the federal level or here in Wisconsin?
There's so much misinformation about immigration laws that it's kind of hard to pinpoint one of them. But I think I'll talk about two, and I mentioned one before, but I always hear again, why don't they just get in line? Why don't they just wait their turn? Our immigration laws are built on a policy where we only let white men become citizens, like from the beginning. While they have improved over the years, they're still restrictive and favor certain nationalities and people. But if you make one mistake, you're probably not going to ever be able to get your green card. They're incredibly difficult for people to process. Even if you're a US citizen and you marry a foreign national, the process of applying for them is incredibly difficult. So I really dislike when people say, just get in line. There just isn't a line. And it's really myopic of people to think that. We need to change our laws. We need to change our policies in order to allow our country to flourish and be a leader in human rights. The second would be a lot of the information about asylum seekers. People are saying, why don't they just do it the right way? Or even President Biden saying, don't come to the United States now, wait. That's not an option for people. People are fleeing for their lives. They're not fleeing. Some people come here for economic opportunity. That's true. But the people that I work with are the bravest people in the world. And they're not coming here for opportunity. They're coming here to truly save their lives. And entering the United States without inspection is often the only option people have, because if they remain in Mexico, they may not survive. And so I think people just have to have a more humane vision of who people are and really take a deep look at why you're trying to forbid outsiders from coming to the United States. Because the United States we are a nation of plenty, most of us. Many of us aren't. There's incredible issues within the United States, but we really need to look at the truth of the situation and offer compassion and relief that's permissible under our laws. So I could go on forever, and I won't.
Sure, great. We're getting a ton of questions now, which is excellent. Jane is asking, the centers in Matamoros and in Tijuana, did you see anything regarding sidewalk schools?
No, I did not. And I've never been to Matamoros. I have some friends who work there. But in Tijuana, I didn't know anything about sidewalk schools. I'm not familiar with that. And maybe I should be, but.
Sure. What can be done to help dreamers here in Wisconsin?
That's a really good question. So right now, we so if we're talking about dreamers, when we often talk about people who came to the United States when they were young, and graduated from high school and sometimes college and seek to remain in the United States because this is their home. So many of them qualify for something called DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, but DACA is not a pathway to citizenship. It is a temporary reprieve from deportation. And so over the past 5 years, so Obama started DACA in 2012. So many people with DACA have had DACA for over 10 years. And many of them are not children anymore, but they are people with careers and homes and families without a pathway to citizenship. And I think one thing we can do, on a federal level is we need to push for a pathway to citizenship for people, dreamers, and for people with DACA. That people need to hear that. I think the people in the United States, it's like 60 to 80% of the people have agree that people with DACA need to have a pathway to citizenship. But in Wisconsin, one thing that I've been working on and really cognizant of is people with DACA and undocumented students, dreamers, they pay out-of-state tuition at state schools, regardless of how long they've lived here, regardless of how long their parents have lived here. And there have been efforts, it's by law that this is the policy. And so there have been efforts to change the law, but have been really held up by misinformation in the legislature, in my opinion. So there really needs to be more movement towards changing that to have a more equitable education system for people who are dreamers and people with DACA, because paying out-of-state tuition often means they cannot seek a higher education, because they also don't qualify for federal loans.
Awesome. Great. A question from Joyce. She says, I live in the western part of Wisconsin, and the closest immigration lawyer is more than an hour from here. What is the best way to access an immigration lawyer for our neighbors who need legal advice or help?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really difficult question. We don't have enough services in Wisconsin. We don't have enough services in the nation, really, to serve everybody that needs representation. Yeah, I don't really have a great answer to that. You can always contact me. I can always try to help in a way, but all of our services are limited. Minneapolis has has a lot of services available too, but it's a difficult process. So you just have to, contact me, contact other nonprofits in order to hopefully help people, or even organize like a Know Your Rights Day at a church or a community center, even virtually, something like this, where people can call in and ask questions or do consultations online, which may be helpful.
Great. Let me pull it up. Oh, sorry about that. Christy, what are some ways churches and other faith communities can support the work being done by organizations at the border?
So, the work that we do at Dilley, it is always done by immigration attorneys. That's the people that are required to be there. That's what the credentials you have to have, or law students. But the work that a lot of the organizations at the border are not, you don't have to be an attorney, because there's needs that are beyond just the legal needs, because people need, when you're in this community where we're serving people, and it's different under the pandemic, but hopefully things will change soon. But, we need to make food. We need people to help care for the children while the parents are giving a legal consultation, because you don't necessarily want the children to have to hear the parents' stories or what they're talking about. Financial support is always really important for those organizations, but volunteer your time is really important. And sometimes they have drives for clothing and supplies and things like that. So those are some ways that you can support.
Great. Thank you all who have put your questions in the chat. Keep them coming. And to everyone who sent in a question before the panel started. One of those questions is, what are you most optimistic about as you look at changes or proposed policy improvements maybe in the Citizenship Act or anything else going forward? What's most optimistic?
So, you know, there was a huge sigh of relief for a lot of people when President Biden took office, because the past 4 years under Trump were really suffocating and horrific to see the amount of suffering that was occurring simply due to the power of the executive. The Citizenship Act of 2021 gives me hope. For one reason, it doesn't look to punish a group of people in order to provide a pathway to citizenship for others. It would, by allowing 11 million people to become full participants in our society, I think it would be a huge act of human kindness, human nature. It's what our country should do, and that gives me a lot of hope. But there's so much work to be done because there's so much false information out there. I responded to someone today who, there was a Fox News host who said, you know, the border is currently open to everybody, which is just blatantly and absurdly false. So we have to be really careful about what information we're hearing, what is true, what is false. But the movement towards permitting 11 million people and a pathway to citizenship, as well as expedited processing for people with DACA and TPS and farm workers, gives me hope. I'm also hopeful because President Biden started temporary protective status for people from Venezuela as well as Burma. But we also, there very well may be a need for people from the country of Haiti. And that seems to be forgotten. So, you know, there's hope, but there's just so much work to be done as well.
Sure. Well, we just have a couple more questions. Thank you so much for your time. And also, what is the best place for financial donations or other gifts to go forward that you would recommend for helping with that?
So there are a number of groups that are doing the work on the border. Currently, right now, with children, Kind is an organization that is doing a lot of representation of children on the border. Al Otro Lado, which I mentioned before, Lawyers for Good Government. If you're looking to support Wisconsin organizations in Wisconsin, there's the Community Immigration Law Center in Madison. The Immigrant Justice Clinic, we always raise money to fund the students' trips to the border because most of the students I work with don't have the financial means to make that trip because they're law students, and often many of them are immigrants themselves or need the financial support. But there's also Catholic Charities in Milwaukee, Voces de la Frontera, a number of places that need support financially.
Great. So we have one more question from George. In witnessing the arrival of many unaccompanied minors at our southern border, is it possible or feasible to volunteer in any way? Particularly, he mentions to serve as a foster family or what other steps that people can do to volunteer?
Yeah, that might. Right now, a lot of what I'm seeing at least in Madison or in Wisconsin, there are families that are now receiving sponsorship information, but it's because their child is now in a facility towards the border. So they receive documentation that they need to sign in order to have their child released. I think in the next coming weeks and months, there might be opportunities to foster children that arrive that don't have family or friends in the United States, and there will be a lot of them. I don't know currently what organizations will be running that, but I'm guessing some of you will know that before I do, because I think some of these organizations were the ones that were doing fostering when family separation occurred. So it will be a lot of Catholic Charities, Lutheran Social Services is my understanding. So, and I can share that information with Christy if I come across it before any of you do. But there's such a need for welcoming people who are, whether they're children or whether they're adults who are seeking asylum. And if you have room in your home and space in your heart to offer that opportunity to people, I just encourage you to do it. It could really change the world. And I know some of you on this call have already done it, and you are my heroes. So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you so much for your time. I guess like a closing question, and it kind of goes along with everything that we've been talking about. What are some ways that we can get involved and help, especially those of us who maybe don't speak Spanish or not, definitely not immigration attorneys. What can we do to help the situation and help those who approach our southern border particularly?
Well, I think all of you have done the most important thing by showing up tonight and learning about what is going on. And I think that, again, speaking the truth and making sure that we inform our family and our friends of really what's going on and leading by example, and also talking to our government officials, because nothing's going to change without them. In order for change to really happen, the people have to speak. We saw that happen with family separation. It stopped because people went out and protested, and people were so disgusted by our government separating children from their parents. But we need to recognize that the immigration system does that to everybody, to many families on a daily basis, whether it's deporting them or separating them while they're waiting to obtain relief in the United States. There's family separation going on a daily basis. And I just hope that everybody that stood up and spoke against family separation will continue to do so in support of the Citizenship Act of 2021 and in support of our immigrant populations.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We're getting a lot of comments. If you could put your contact information in the chat, as well as if there's maybe a list of organizations or resources that you'd recommend, we'd really appreciate that. And Erin, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
No, thank you so much for having me. I am honored to be here, and thank you for your time.
Awesome. Well, as we wrap up today, I wanted to share my screen and talk about next steps and ways that you can get involved further. So please, and I'm going to put it in the chat. If you'd like to get involved and stay up to date on what the Lutheran Office for Public Policy in Wisconsin is doing, immigration policy is one of our priorities, and we often have ways that you can get involved and raise your voice, as Professor Barbato was talking about, in protection of these, in support of these policies, and ways that you can reach out to your legislators. So I will put that link in the chat to sign up for action alerts. Also, you can follow LPPW or the South Central Synod of Wisconsin for more, follow them on Facebook for more updates and events. Thank you so much to the South Central Synod's task force for helping co-lead this panel today. And thank you to Robin and Walter in the office for doing that. Also want to point to a number of other resources on the ELCA's resource page. So you can go to elca.org/resources to learn about how to get involved in advocacy materials, particularly through our Amparo network, which works with a lot of these issues. Our next event, I'll be happy to say, is Tuesday, May 25th at 7 o'clock. We'll be hearing from, this time, keynote speaker Mary Campbell, who's the program director of ELCA's Amparo network. Learn about what the church is doing to welcome people that come into our country and welcome asylum seekers and those of that nature. So join us for that. We really look forward to it, and we will have a registration link out soon for that. So thank you all so much for spending your evening with us and for coming to tonight's event. Thank you so much to Professor Barbato for her discussion and for taking the time to answer questions. At this time, I will put that link in the chat, and I hope that all of you have a good rest of your evening. And thank you from all of us at LPPW and from the South Central Synod for joining us this evening. So thank you all.